Tourist revenues are disappearing, villages along the border are getting smaller, and local businesses that used to be bustling are now muttering quiet desperation. But who is paying attention? Why are major shopping areas having record-high vacancies while tour guides are doing second jobs to make ends meet? When did important things like cross-border trade and weekend traffic become ghost town stats that no one wanted to talk about? This isn't just a narrative about missing vacations. Today we're going to look at 11 states in the United States that might be looking at Canada as a lifeboat. This could be the start of something greater. Number 10. Washington. Seattle's ports are sluggish, weekend tourist is drying up, and Canadian commercial connections are slowly disintegrating. But why are local leaders so worried behind closed doors? Washington maintains a profound economic tie with Canada. In 2024 alone, more than $25 billion in commodities traveled across its northern border, powering businesses from aircraft to apples. But in 2025, cross-border trade has taken a terrible impact. Exports to Canada have decreased by roughly 17%, upsetting farmers in Yakima and seafood producers along the coast. So what happens when Bellingham hotels remain empty over long weekends that used to draw in waves of Canadian visitors? How do small towns survive? When immigration delays stretch longer, tariffs return, and tourism buses stop rolling in behind the stunning mountain scenery and thriving tech headlines? The fissures are forming. Local firms are already sounding the alarm, with some even urging state politicians to explore deeper economic links with British Columbia. Could this be more than simply a slowdown? And if British Columbia's economy is roaring back while Washington's is declining, would it be that far-fetched to conceive a Pacific partnership? One thing's clear. When the neighbors over the border cease arriving, Washington starts feeling the chill. Before we go on to the next state, hit the like button if this is opening your eyes, and be sure to subscribe because what's coming next will catch you off guard. Number 9. Montana. Cross-border tourism is plummeting, remote lodges are shutting their doors early, and Glacier Park guides are straining to make ends meet. Has Montana quietly slid into a northern freeze? Montana shares roughly 400 miles of border with Alberta and British Columbia, historically a reliable gateway for Canadian tourists seeking the harsh landscape and wide-open sky. But in 2025 something changed. Hotel occupancy in border towns like Eureka and Shelby decreased by roughly 30%. Fishing charters on Flathead Lake were cancelled in record numbers, and summer cabins formerly booked months in advance now sit idle. Why are Canadian families no longer heading south for weekend getaways? Where did the continuous flow of tourism dollars, more than $1.2 billion just 2 years ago, suddenly vanish to local businesses? Are feeling it hard. Outfitters in Kalispell describe losing their busiest season in over a decade, while Indigenous craft merchants near the border claim foot traffic has plummeted to a trickle without Canadian clients. Many rural companies are barely clinging on, and winter hasn't even arrived yet. So what happens when Montana's quiet economic engine built on hospitality, nature, and a reliable cross-border flow grinds to a halt? Could a community so connected to the rhythm of Canadian tourism truly continue without looking north for solutions? Some lawmakers think it's time for a new discourse. Quietly, there's been conversation among rural leaders about the merits of connecting more directly with Canada's border provinces. They mention Canada's strong support for Indigenous collaborations, more consistent tourist grants, and increased investments in ecotourism policies that might directly aid Montana's suffering communities. Would that be enough to spark a meaningful political conversation? Or will the state wait until more businesses go under before asking? Are we better off looking north? When the cabins become dark, the guides head home and the border crossings fall silent. Montana loses more than just visitors, it loses part of its lifeline, and if that lifeline doesn't return soon, who's going to save these villages before they die altogether? If you're starting to worry whether your own state could be on this list, you're not alone. Go ahead and tap subscribe now, so you don't miss what we disclose next. Number 8. Alaska's pipeline developments are stagnating, Arctic exports are being diverted, and gasoline prices across the region are discreetly climbing. But why are Alaskans getting more and more angry with Washington? Alaska is more like Canada than it is like the rest of the United States. It borders the Yukon, runs oil via Canada, and is more in line with Canadian Arctic policy than decisions made thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C. in 2025 alone. Alaska lost roughly $1.5 billion in planned trade earnings owing to new federal regulations that Canada openly rejected. Could that be why Alaskan lawmakers are now publicly debating if the state would be economically stronger as part of a Canadian alliance? With growing energy bills, limited infrastructural assistance, and frayed federal connections, many in Juneau are asking, does it still make sense for Alaska to remain linked to a system that continues to disregard it? Number 7. Minnesota. Farms are reducing back production, manufacturing hubs are losing orders, and lakeside resorts are slashing workers. Mid-season. What's driving Minnesota's peaceful border economy to falter? Minnesota shares more than 400 miles with the Canadian states of Manitoba and Ontario. For years that boundary meant money. In 2024, Minnesota transported more than $27.5 billion in goods with Canada as its main commercial partner, but in 2025 those figures are sliding. Exports have declined by over 14%, and tourism across the border has practically flatlined. Resorts in the Boundary Waters are reporting cancellations from longtime Canadian guests, and border towns like International Falls are fighting to stay afloat. Why are outdoor equipment stores seeing more returns than rentals? What's causing long-standing family businesses in Grand Marais to display for sale signs in their windows? Behind the figures is a larger concern. Trade delays, escalating tariffs, and federal choices that Minnesota's company owners feel they have no voice in. Industries related to forestry, food manufacturing, and transport are all feeling the impact. Trucking businesses that had made daily excursions to Thunder Bay are suddenly cutting routes, while smaller farms near the Red River are stuck with unsold food they once counted. On exporting north in the Twin Cities, lawmakers are beginning to take note. A recent proposal by a state legislator proposed the possibility of investigating regional trade compacts with Canada, referring to British Columbia's economic resiliency and Manitoba's infrastructure investments as examples worth copying. Would such kinds of links bring back the stability Minnesota's border towns need? Or could the solution be even bigger? It may sound like a far shot, but the talk is happening quietly and cautiously, but it is happening in small-town cafes and regional boardrooms. Some Minnesota are asking whether affiliation with Canada could better suit their future than continued dependent on unpredictable federal policy. If the lakes dry up, the visitors stop coming, and the commerce channels keep closing. What precisely is Minnesota waiting for? And more crucially, if a better future waits just beyond the border, who's going to be bold enough to go for it? Number 6. Idaho. Lumber is building up in storage yards, potato shipments are lingering too long in warehouses, and formerly dependable export channels to Canada are now clogged in red tape. May Idaho's quiet northern villages be facing a border breakdown? No one's prepared for. In 2025, cross-border trade between Idaho and Canada decreased dramatically. Agricultural goods, formerly welcomed across British Columbia with minimal delay, are now experiencing inspection bottlenecks and hefty surcharges. According to state trade analysts, Idaho lost an estimated $800 million in export potential this year alone, driven by new federal trucking requirements and Canadian import changes. Farmers in Coeur d'Alene and grain distributors near Standpoint are already voicing worries. Some have begun laying off seasonal staff earlier than usual, so why are Bonner's Ferry business owners experiencing their worst spring sales in over a decade? What happens when Canadian buyers skip northern Idaho altogether and reset contracts through Washington instead? The political mood is evolving, too. In Boise, a group of senators recently raised eyebrows when they suggested Idaho should take a closer look at its economic future beyond federal collaborations. They referred to British Columbia's expanding food import incentives and green energy credits as more beneficial than the policies now supplied out of Washington, D.C. Would a realignment with Canada's trade bloc genuinely benefit northern Idaho's industries? Could Canada's approach of universal farm subsidies and green development initiatives offer more security for vulnerable rural communities? While it seems extreme, criticism is getting louder in areas closer to the border where towns rely significantly on Canadian business and where Washington's policies seem increasingly distant and tone-deaf. In a recent local radio poll, 22% of respondents in northern Idaho said they'd support a conversation about closer economic integration with Canada, even if it meant a total political shift. If export delays, economic losses, and mounting frustration continue at this pace, how long before talk turns into action? And if Idaho's border economy continues to suffer, does it really make sense to keep waiting for federal support that may never come? Number 5, North Dakota. Oil rigs are scaling back operations, wheat exports are getting redirected, and cross-border trade with Canada is slowing to a crawl. Could North Dakota be experiencing an economic pinch from both sides? North Dakota's 500-mile border with Saskatchewan and Manitoba was once a crucial conduit for agricultural supplies, crude oil, and manufacturing parts, but in 2025 that connection is under stress. New federal export limits, fuel transport problems, and strained trade talks have cost the state almost $900 million in cross-border losses. This year, farmers in Mitt and Williston are reporting large orders canceled without warning, and grain elevators are sitting fuller than they should be thus deep into July. Why are grain trucks sitting on roadways that used to throb with international activity? What does it mean for the region's future when ethanol facilities begin limiting their output just to stay afloat? Local co-ops are especially hurry. Fertilizer supplies coming in from Canada have suffered unanticipated delays due to new customs rules. While machinery components, traditionally imported from Manitoba, are now locked up in months-long back orders in smaller towns like Bow and Crosby, even a few weeks of downtime may destroy a whole season. The frustration is growing. Farmers are questioning why the federal government seems unprepared to defend North Dakota's economic interests. In response, a few of regional officials have broached the notion of establishing direct cooperation with Canadian provinces, claiming improved alignment with Saskatchewan's agricultural subsidies and cross-border resource management. Would these kinds of agreements truly make more sense than relying on distant bureaucrats? In Washington, D.C., could a formal partnership or even a debate about joining Canada give more assurance for small-town economies that feel abandoned in an area where identity is rooted to hard work, land, and weather? Questions like these originally sounded ridiculous, but with every cancelled shipment and every policy neglected by Washington, they're looking less like fiction and more like a plan worth exploring. And if North Dakota's leaders are prepared to start the discourse, who else could be listening? Number 4, Vermont craft breweries are closing, early mountain lodges are reducing back staff, and border markets are reporting their slowest summer in years has Vermont quietly slipped into a cross-border disaster that no one anticipated coming. Vermont enjoys a long and traditionally open border with Quebec, a partnership built on tourism, trade, and deep cultural ties in 2025. However, that rhythm has broken. Canadian visitors, once a regular flow into cities like St. Albans and Newport, have plummeted by nearly 30%. Family-owned inns in the Green Mountains are struggling to fill rooms. Maple syrup exports, which previously flooded into Canadian markets, are caught in limbo due to packaging limitations and delays at customs. Why are French-speaking tourists skipping Vermont for Nova Scotia? How many more weeks can small-town general stores survive without their typical surge of Canadian foot traffic? Frustration is growing. Local politicians are starting to explore whether Vermont's economic future would be stronger if it allied more directly with Quebec. A few town leaders have even urged going into bilateral tourism ties without waiting for Washington's assent. If Vermont's peaceful economy continues to bleed along the border, how long before its famously independent spirit starts seriously exploring another path? Number 3. Michigan. Auto shipments are halting, factory shifts are being curtailed, and border crossings that once bustled with Canadian traffic now reverberate with silence. How long can Michigan take the hit before something gives? Michigan and Ontario are more than neighbors, they economic twins. The state exported over $68 billion in products to Canada in 2024 alone, with autos and machinery leading the drive. But by mid-2025 that routine is breaking, cross-border freight delays have increased, and supply chain concerns are prompting car companies in Detroit and Flint to curtail production days. 100 of people have already been laid off. Why are auto lots in Windsor seeming more stalked than those in Detroit? What happens when Ontario's rules make it easier to create, transport, and sell than anything coming out of Michigan? The discomfort is spreading fast. Downtown Windsor eateries that once served American commuters are closing early. Meanwhile, Michigan's own border communities from Port Huron to Sault Ste. Marie are watching tourists and local business with interest. Canadian customers, who formerly poured millions into Michigan's outlet malls, are staying home because of tougher U.S. entrance regulations and a stronger Canadian dollar behind closed doors. There's discontent. Some local officials are considering the idea of pressing for regional trade deals independent of Washington's influence. Others have gone further, publicly asking whether Michigan, with its profound connection into Ontario's economy, might be better suited aligning directly with Canada. Could Detroit's future look more like Toronto's than DC's? Would Michigan residents prefer better healthcare, greater labor protections, and smoother commerce over national loyalty? For many, that's still unimaginable. But for manufacturing workers facing their third layoff in 2 years or company owners watching half their Canadian customer base vanish overnight, the idea is no longer so far-fetched. If the bridges that previously connected Michigan to its closest partner are no longer transporting wealth, then the real question is: will the people construct those bridges north or continue tied to a system that's leaving them behind? And if they do choose to look north, who's really going to stop them? This might sound extreme. But so did the last two. Press that like button and subscribe while you're here. Trust me. We're merely getting started. Number 2, New York. Broadway lights are still shining, but ticket queues are diminishing. Upstate shops are wide open, but Canadian customers are nowhere in sight, and border towns, once driven by tourism and trade, are prepared for a frigid, uncertain season. Could New York be watching its northern lifelines fade away? In 2024, approximately 4 million Canadian visitors entered into New York, spending over $1.7 billion in locations like Buffalo, Albany, and New York City. But 2025 has brought a hard stop. Canadian tourism has decreased by roughly 21%, and retailers across the state are already reporting devastating losses. Niagara Falls souvenir shops have cut hours. Tour buses in Manhattan are operating at half a capacity. Some hoteliers along the St. Lawrence River are already planning to close 2 months early. Why are cross-border buyers skipping Black Friday trips? What happens when the Peace Bridge starts seeing more leaving traffic than incoming? The economic fallout is only half the tale. Trade delays at critical crossings like the 1000 Islands Bridge are piling up. Agricultural exports from upstate New York to Quebec are experiencing new inspection backlogs, costing farmers thousands. Small shops in Plattsburgh and Watertown, formerly prospering on Canadian consumers, are running clearance sales just to keep alive. And then there's the politics. Several New York lawmakers have publicly attacked federal trade policy, alleging that it ignores the realities of the state's significant integration with Canada. Some have even suggested the prospect of standalone trade discussions or regional deals with Ontario and Quebec. Could New York realistically operate as a semi-autonomous trading zone related more closely to its northern neighbors than to Washington? Would cities like Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse benefit more from integrating with the Canadian economy than remaining stuck in federal gridlock? These were once unimaginable questions, but today they're part of genuine conversations happening in upstate chambers of commerce and even talked about in Albany hallways. When the concerts slow down, the stores fall silent and the bridges grow deserted. What is New York truly losing? And if the answer is everything, then how long until the state starts looking north? Not just for tourism, but for a better future. Number 1, Maine. Fishermen are pulling in smaller hauls, family run-ins are going dark, and souvenir shops along Route 1 are lowering prices. Just to transfer merchandise has Maine become the quietest casualty of a dwindling cross-border trade. Maine shares more than 600 miles of border with Canada, connecting extensively with New Brunswick and Quebec through trade, tourism, and familial ties. But in 2025, that long-standing friendship is crumbling. Canadian vacationers who previously poured roughly $400 million into Maine's seaside towns and ski communities are gone. Crossings at Calais and Halton are down by 32%. Boutique bed and breakfasts in Bar Harbor have decreased their hours. Lobstermen near Eastport say their cargoes are backing up at the docks. Why are Franco-American cities losing their cultural visitors? What happens when sugar shacks, ski slopes, and seafood shops no longer have the Canadian crowds they depend on? Local officials in Aroostook and Washington counties are beginning to discuss quietly. Some are floating a notion that once would have been laughed off, expanding connections with Canadian provinces even if it means skipping federal approval. If Maine's economic lifeline is slipping north, should the state follow it, and if not, now, then how much more strain can these communities take? The fissures are emerging, the questions are louder, and the future of these border states may not be as fixed as we previously imagined. Could your state be next to reevaluate its place on the map? Hit that like button, share this video and subscribe since the next shift could startle.